Hello and welcome to the program. My name is Michael Finney. Today I am joined by Graham Bradley. Would you like to say hello, sir?
Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking?
Hey, so you are releasing a new book, I believe the week that this is going to come out, or the week prior, this week maybe, the week we're recording. I don't know. Sometimes I get kind of messed up in terms of time because things are very fluid in that sense. But let's start at the beginning. For anybody who doesn't know you, tell us about Graham Bradley. Who are you? Where are you from? Any interesting biographical information that you feel is pertinent?
Okay, well, as far as where I'm from, because I'm a clever and cheeky fellow, I put on my Twitter profile, Nomad of Canvutalk. Canvutalk is California, Nevada, Utah, Oklahoma. Those are all the places that I've lived. I'm not an army brat or anything. I'm just restless. So I was born in Cali, and then I mostly grew up in the Vegas Valley, tried Salt Lake for a number of years. And then finally, my wife and I said we were going to pull the trigger on a place where we were never going to move from again. And Oklahoma City kind of checked all the boxes. So we ended up here. For work, I'm a Class A truck driver. I've had a CDL for over a decade, and I've done a little bit of everything. I've done OTR, I've done chemical tankers, equipment rental, construction, demolition. Some of those kind of overlapped at the same job. And then I've just been in manual refrigerated delivery for the last several years, and I'll probably ride with that. The company I'm with has a good longevity map for holding their drivers. And so I'll just keep doing that side of things. But I've always been a writer and an illustrator. I probably started writing, third grade. I was 8 years old, and my teacher introduced us to this, concept like, hey, you can make your own little rinky-dink books. And she'd run them over to Kinko's and print them off and get them spiral bound for us. And I was like, oh, shoot, I wrote a book. And so I've just been doing that ever since. Started attending writers' conferences about 20 years back to figure out how to kind of dial in and make the craft better. What was I doing wrong? What did I need to do right? How would I go about finding editors? And, what does that process look like working with other writers? And just doing the Louis L'Amour thing of understanding that you're never going to be good enough. You're never going to know enough. But with that mentality, you should just stay hungry and always understand that you can do it better. And that's kind of the road that I've been doing ever since. I had an agent for a while, but ultimately the stuff that I was writing was not really what she was specializing in on the publishing side. So we parted ways back in 2013. But that experience was still useful, just seeing that side of the business and getting used to writing fast and editing fast if I had to. And then after that, I got into the self-publishing side, and I've been doing that since 2014. And finally decided, okay, well, I can keep doing that, and that's easy enough. But obviously, I've still got to drive a truck for a living, and I do want to get a little bit more traction under me with the writing side of things. So I started sending stuff out to small presses, short stories, anthologies, things like that, with some success here and there. And then finally with this book that's coming out in a couple of days, they were looking for specifically boys' adventure books. And I'd backburnered an idea for that exact thing for years. And I was like, at this point, with all the writing I've done and the number of times I've been around the block with getting a book finished and getting it out, I could knock this out pretty well, and it wouldn't be, all that stress-inducing. And of course, everybody thinks that when you start a project, like, oh yeah, no, this particular one will be easy. It won't be like all the others. And then you hit the middle and
lost in the weeds,
and you're driving backwards in the dark over speed bumps. But eventually, you figure out what's going wrong with it, and it still came together relatively quickly. And I sent it off to him, and I just kind of twiddled my thumbs for a few months. I had other projects to work on, and then they got back to me a few months later, and they were very enthusiastic about it. They're like, this does everything that we need it to do, and we're very excited about it. It's like, sweet. So, maybe after 20 years, I might not be good enough, but I feel like I finally know what I'm doing a little bit in terms of writing as an adult. I've been writing since I was a kid, but seriously pursuing it since 2005 in the middle of everything else I've had going on. And you know what they say about it takes 10 years, 20 years to be an overnight success. And when the book comes out, we'll see how true that is. But I'm not expecting it to be utterly life-changing, but it feels like it's a meaningful milestone in this endless journey of just, making things that people want to read.
Yeah, very cool. I feel like we should mention your moniker that you kind of publicize as.
The literate trucker.
Yeah.
Trucker Man Reads.
I mean, that's good branding, isn't it?
Yeah, it's and I've gotten better at the branding side of things just because, marketing is a completely different skill set to writing, but it is utterly essential if you actually want to sell anything. And you've got to be able to very quickly and directly get it into people's heads, like who you are and what you're about. And, stereotypes exist for a reason. Most guys that get into trucking don't do it because they were also academics to any degree. But there are plenty of them that subsist on audiobooks. You get a lot of windshield time and a lot of listening time, and that medium is very popular in the line of work that I'm in. But even so, I meet a lot more of my fellow drivers who are into podcasts, which is fine. I mean, you still, gain some entertainment and enlightenment from that the same way that you would with books. But it's a special treat to run into another truck driver who is also an avid reader across multiple genres. And so, putting that out there that, I'm Graham Bradley, I'm the literate trucker. It's not me throwing elbows at my fellow brethren of the road, but it hopefully communicates, what I'm about. I spend all day in a truck or, in the trailer. I got an earbud in. I work mostly alone. I take it out when I'm dealing with customers, but I do a lot of audiobook listening, and usually when I'm done with my day and I'm driving home, I'll pop my microphone in and just talk about what I listened to that day, or a book that I read in print over the weekend, and throw it up as a cheap video on YouTube. My goal is to find things that I like, or things that I like about books that I read, even if I didn't generally enjoy the book all that much. I'm like, okay, but here's a piece of it that really stood out to me that I think was useful and made it a good experience, and so on and so forth. My goal is to, with the channel side of things and with the social media side of things, is in addition to, marketing my own work, I just want to spread my own love of reading. And I think, people would find a lot more fulfillment in the effort that it takes to read versus sort of the more casual consumption of content online or TV shows on streaming platforms. Like, those things aren't bad in and of themselves, but there's a reason that reading and writing have been around for so long, and they can be a lot more beneficial to us at a more profound level. And, I've always been a reader. I've always loved this particular medium. I'm never going to move off of it, and I want to share that passion that I have for it with people. And so I'm a trucker, I read, and I want to help other people find things that they would want to read.
There was something you had said a little while back in regards to the audience overlap of audiobooks and podcasts. And, you're making content, right? Coverage, but you're also legitimately creating projects. And I think that gives you a good view of, the landscape generally or broadly. I think that there's, it sure is tough to say like audiobooks are the elevated, medium or audio experience compared to podcasts or something. I don't think that's true all the time. I think there's like some absolute garbage audiobooks. I think there's some absolutely fantastic podcasts out there, this one included.
Yeah, there's, if we're talking in a Venn diagram sense, if you've got, the audiobook circle and the podcast circle, and you overlap them, I couldn't give you an exact metric on how big that center field is, but there's definitely, as I've gone on and I've done fewer audiobooks at a time and more podcasts at a time, because I find more stuff that's of higher or lower quality in both media. There's a blurred line somewhere there, where, like you said, you find bad audiobooks and you find good podcasts. I think some of the distinguishing qualities where they're going to come down to the quality of the performance, the quality of the research and the writing for the script. One huge factor that is often difficult to quantify is the passion of the writer behind it. And there are times when there's an intangible quality to that, but it's hard to put a number on it and say, this is why this is great. And that's where I've just got to say, I really love this. You should try it and see what you think. There are YouTubers, a lot more of them, who pretty much use YouTube as a podcasting platform, which is fine. That's what I do with a lot of my book review videos. It's just it's mostly audio. The image is only there so that I can turn it into a video and upload it to YouTube. But there are also these podcasters that do long form videos of their shows. Are you familiar with Wendigoon?
I don't know. That word sounds familiar, but it sounds like a lot of other words that I know.
Exactly. I mean, some of these guys, their handles are just Scrabble bags that got barfed up. I don't know, where he came up with the name Wendigoon, but he does these incredibly deep dives into various subjects, and some of his videos are 3, 4, 5 hours long. And I just got to archive them and be like, okay, I'll get around to that later. For years, I've paid for YouTube Premium because, in addition to you don't get the ads, what's really worth it for me is that one, you can download videos, play them without a signal. And wherever I'm driving, sometimes I'll get into a bad signal spot. If I'm streaming something, I'll lose it. But two, you can play it with the screen off on your phone, which enables YouTube to move better into the podcast space. Well, Wendigoon has done several videos on lesser known episodes in history or how certain business or government practices work. He had one in the last couple of months that I thought was just fantastic. It was about uranium mining in the Southwest desert, specifically near Navajo reservations in Utah and New Mexico, and how corrupt that whole process was in the mid 1900s, especially in the wake of the atomic drive, saying hey, we need more of this radioactive material. There are uranium mines in Utah and New Mexico, and we're going to go dig them up. And we don't care if the exact execution of it is all that detrimental because it's going to be on these Indian reservations, and who gives a crap, right? And Wendigoon went into a lot of detail in his research on that. And he also, I think he's got a friend who is Navajo and grew up on one of those reservations and was able to help him kind of contextualize a lot of the information and give him a boots on the ground perspective of what it was like growing up in those areas where the groundwater was poisoned and the illnesses that people had. And he's not necessarily presenting it as a crusader for any particular cause. He's just very passionately delivering information in his videos and trusting his audience to come to their own well-reasoned conclusions. And that's, especially when you're dealing with nonfiction, I think that's the right approach to take is, you just display the facts and treat your audience like they're smart enough to make up their own minds about it. That video in particular, it might've been the first one of his that I listened to all the way through without stopping. Is man, it's not too far off from where I grew up in the Las Vegas Valley. I mean, we had Paiute reservations off to the northern end of the valley, and we didn't have uranium mines, but I've worked at some of those uranium mines in Utah when I was driving hazmat. There's one in Blanding, and a lot of the employees there were Navajo guys who lived on the nearby res. There was a degree of connection I had to that story, and he put all the right kinds of effort into telling it as well as he did. And there are more and more podcasters like him who are gaining traction and finding an audience and producing stuff that would work well as an audiobook, but it's fine in the podcast medium. Even taking away the monetary success that he's having with it, he's doing effective work as a creator and as a writer and as a performer in that medium. Sorry, that's me wandering the way that I tend to do when I just get excited about a subject. My brain is like, okay, say everything that I have in my head about this, and that's where I go. But Wendigoon is just one such guy.
Yeah, very cool. I don't mind. That's conversation.
there's one more channel I want to recommend here if I can.
Sure. Well, you can.
Two guys, I believe. So I know that one guy's name is Aiden Mattis, and I think the other guy's name is Aiden Thornbury. So they call each other by their last names, but they run a channel called The Lore Lodge. And they're gaining some traction. They got a big boost last year when they got invited onto the Unsubscribe podcast with like Fat Electrician and the AK guy and Donut Operator, like a bunch of those macho veteran history buff type dudes. They did a video about the 20th anniversary of Killdozer in Granby, Colorado, and I'm sure most people have heard of that story. And they did just this incredible, again, like a deep dive into the facts of what happened. The families involved, the laws, and the history of the local town. Apparently, also Marvin Heemeyer recorded cassette tapes of him kind of talking to himself over a year and a half while he was building the machine. And the dude might have been on the spectrum. That was part of their conclusion with some of the weird tangents that he would go down. But he was like pretty convinced that God was inspiring him to do this and removing obstacles from his ways to get the Killdozer finished, to go on this rampage. They listened to all those tapes. And again, like it wasn't the video that they did on it in the end wasn't them trying to persuade anybody one way or the other. They're just like, here's the facts, ergo, this is the story. And they put that on their channel, The Lore Lodge. And I loved their video on that. And I went and subscribed to their channel, and they're putting out new videos pretty much weekly. They do a lot of missing 411 cases, people that randomly go missing in national parks or in the Appalachian Mountains. They analyze unsolved murder stories. They do it without the kind of like History Channel sensationalism that you might be used to from a late night cable show. And for a couple of guys that are in their late 20s, they've been at this for a while, and their approach to it all is really mature and well reasoned, and it makes for not just great entertainment, but really like enlightening and edifying material. And it's the kind of thing that I'm looking for when I read a nonfiction book. They're just happening to do it in this weekly podcast. The episodes can be around 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes longer. And I don't mind taking a break from an audiobook and listening to something that's a little bit shorter, but very dense and very informative, because, hey, that teaches me something new. It gives me a perspective that I didn't have before. And if I can never know enough and never be good enough, then I can at least get farther along the path by finding things like this to listen to.
Let's hear about your perspectives on writing, or influences on your writing, favorite authors and books, or, people that you see a connection between your work and theirs, in any sense, I would say.
That is a great question. I've got this list. So I carry if I was on video, I'd show you. My wallet is a sketch wallet. There's this website, sketchwallet.org. They make wallets that they can carry all your cards and whatever, but it's got a tiny little sketchbook in it as well. And it's for artists and stuff. And I'll if I'm ever bored, I try not to pull my phone out so much. Instead, pull the wallet out and draw something. Make something productive. But I keep a list on the back there because there's a big drawing that I want to do someday of me and all of the authors that have had a really outsized influence on me. And I can think of pretty much all of them going back to my childhood. Growing up in the 90s, the first author that I really just started getting my hands on whatever he wrote was R.L. Stine with Goosebumps. In second grade, those were viral books for young readers, and I read those all through elementary school. And then Animorphs came out from K.A. Applegate when I was in middle school, and I kept up with those for a few years after I was out of the target audience. I think that series ran for like 5 years. I got really excited with this whole kind of serial method that these authors were doing with telling. Animorphs was a story with the same characters that went on month to month, whereas Goosebumps was it was usually like a different cast of characters doing something weird and spooky and scary. But it fueled my imagination, and that was since that was right around the time I started writing. I started writing little short stories like that. But a kid goes up into the attic and he finds something spooky, and it complicates his life, and he spends the next 100 pages having to solve it. Or with Animorphs, it's like, oh, there's this alien invasion that only ththese kids know about, and they don't know who they can trust, and so they can't tell anybody, and they got to fight off the aliens with these weird powers that an alien gave them. Like, I loved that. It took me completely out of my classes and left me daydreaming all day long, which for me is the mark of great fiction. And then as I got older, I started reading Michael Crichton, and I didn't always understand the science, but I generally was able to follow the story. And by the time I was a senior in high school and I was reading Timeline, I was convinced that time travel was not only possible, but it was regularly happening, and just nobody knew about it because they didn't read Michael Crichton. I wanted to have that kind of impact on an audience. Now, granted, I'm nowhere near as intelligent as that guy was, and I'm still still working on it. Excuse me, but he's one of those guys that I'll still read and reread his books all these years later. I want to be able to piece together seemingly disparate elements to a story the way that he does. Another hugely influential author, even to this day, is Gary Paulson. I started out reading Hatchet, and then there were several sequels to that one. There's an alternate ending to that story called Brian's Winter, and it surprises me how few people have actually heard of it. A lot of people know that he wrote a sequel to Hatchet called The River, but Brian's Winter is an alternate ending where he didn't get rescued at the end of Hatchet. Are you familiar with that book, Hatchet?
I am, yeah.
Yeah. A kid gets stranded in the wilderness during the summer, and he's only got a hatchet to survive. Well, he gets rescued at the end of the summer, but in Brian's Winter, he doesn't get rescued, and he has to kind of learn everything all over again when the environment changes for winter. And I first picked that up in like the fall of 1998, and I must have read that book a dozen times over the next month. I just fell into it. I liked the technical aspect of it, the idea that somebody my age could survive something like that. And it, like so many great pieces of fiction that I've loved over the years, it just fueled my imagination. Getting older and getting into my 20s, mid-20s was around the time Larry Correia kicked off with Baen Books with Monster Hunter International, which was just pure pulp entertainment. He was also, it seemed like he was doing things that nobody else was in terms of just, hey, what if we take all these horror movie tropes where somebody has a limp and they're running down a hallway and a werewolf is chasing him, and instead we give this guy a gun and he fights back and he kills the werewolf. I'm like, finally, don't go around the corner in the dark in a cabin in the woods. Okay, do it, but you've got to have like an M4 in your hands and you can fight whatever's around the corner. It's like, okay, finally, like this was awesome. He also started writing, different series in different genres and with different elements to show that he wasn't a one-trick pony. Like he could bring that skill set to a bunch of different things. And I'm like, you could convince me very easily that Larry Correia can write anything and make it exciting. Brandon Sanderson, I was a huge fan of his for a long time. I've kind of grown out of an interest in like overwrought, overly drawn out epic fantasy stuff, but there's still plenty of his that I like and that I'll reread every couple of years. Same thing. Like he was a guy who was, he would take fantasy tropes and turn them on their heads in really, really interesting ways. I love his Mistborn series above all the rest. I've got some friends that are really like down on his Elantris book, but that was the first one of his that I read. And it's like, no, like that blazed a new path as far as, my fantasy reading. I loved that he was doing something new, doing something inventive, and that, even this 500-page dense fictional world was something that I could easily turn pages and get through and want to know what happened next. That's a quality that it's hard to fake. Especially the more and more that I read, it's more often than not, I find books that I'll get a couple of pages into them and like, I'm only continuing on because I'm forcing myself to. Whereas, every once in a while you'll find a book where you look down and at the page numbers and 30 pages have gone by and you don't even notice because you're just burning through it. It's done so well. Those ones are rare, but I love them when I find them. In my 30s, by then I don't know that I found so many new authors that had that kind of impact on me, but I did keep finding new books that did that for me. I was just tweeting about this before the show started. In 2008, when the Hunger Games came out, it came out during that era of like YA boom, where a lot of books came out that were the same. There was some plucky, innocent protagonist in a village somewhere under the thumb of an evil empire, and he or she, usually she, was the chosen one, and blah, blah, blah. Like, all these books were the same, and eventually the whole genre fizzled out. But the Hunger Games stands above the rest because, like I said in my X posts, it actually has something to say about what groups of people do when they get together, and the things that we're willing to endure as long as something bad doesn't happen to us. Like, there's much more profound philosophy in that book than the peers of its genre have. And I think that's what's given it the staying power over the years, not just the original trilogy, but the 2 sequels that she's done since then. For that reason, I would put Suzanne Collins on that same list of authors that have had an outsized impact on me. And that's, I would put her there just for that one series. I've tried reading 1 or 2 of her others. She's written some like middle grade stuff for kids that did fine. They weren't bad. They just weren't for me. But that one, like, I go back to it every couple of years. I've read that whole series 3 or 4 times. I own them in English hardcover and Spanish paperback. I got all the audiobooks. I love that series. And Pierce Brown's Red Rising trilogy, well, the first 3, they've got some similar elements to those Hunger Games books, but same thing. Like, he's writing something a little bit more philosophical in addition to having this spacefaring Roman Empire 1,000 years into the future. He's got ideas about the things that we tolerate as a society, the way that we allow ourselves to be governed, different systems of government and how they would or wouldn't work. There are ideas in the middle of all of the action and the character intrigue and all of that stuff. I have not been a fan of the second trilogy of books that he's done. I think he's just kind of out in the weeds, wandering and writing about action and violence without much of a direction. But those first 3 were tightly focused and brilliant in their execution. And much like Hunger Games, I'll read those again every couple of years. And then on the comic book side of things, there's one guy in particular that I wanted to highlight. As far as my YouTube audience goes, not many people who read the print books that I recommend will also get into comic books, but I do a little bit of both. And there are big names with the big companies or guys that have just been professionals in the industry for years. But one of the more niche guys who is very polarizing, people tend to have strong feelings about him one way or the other, is Richard Meyer. He's known on YouTube as your boy Zach, and he started a channel about 8 years ago where he's been a lifelong comic book fan, 30, 40 years now. He's in his 50s, but ever since he was a kid, he was collecting. And he noticed about 10 years ago that comics were really starting to suck. And he started making videos explaining why. And to paint it with a really broad brushstroke, it had to do with gender politics and leftist ideology and stuff. That's what was leading to these poorly written and poorly drawn comics. And he would just make videos flipping through comics being like, this is crap, this doesn't work, this is bad. And he got a lot of pushback for that. But eventually the comic companies stopped publishing things with that bent because they realized, like, this is destroying our sales. It's pushing away our audience. It's not working. And comics have kind of corrected course. And now a lot of the YouTube discussions about comics are coming from the other side of the political aisle, and he's pushing back against that as well. If I made this metaphor just the other night in the comments on one of his videos, is that it's like standing in a national park and you want to enjoy the beauty of the national park. That's what comic books are. But then you've got people standing on one side with trebuchets full of radioactive waste, and another army comes in on the other side and they got their trebuchets and their radioactive waste, and they want to throw them at each other and make it a political thing. And you just want to enjoy this pristine, beautiful national park that is great comic books. And he's been unafraid to stand in front of either side and say, you guys are both screwing this up, knock it off. Here's what we need to do to make comics really, really work. And in addition to him being a critic and a fan and a consumer of comics, he started making his own several years ago, and he's really freaking good at it. There are a lot of indie guys that jump into, whether it's comics or whether it's print books. They're like, well, I'm also an indie publisher and I hate the mainstream stuff. Come buy my stuff. And you try it out, and there's a lot of indie stuff out there that's bad, without naming any names. And I'm sure that even some of the books that I've put out have not been everybody's cup of tea, but he's that rare case of a guy who like he's not afraid to throw a punch at anything, not necessarily like, you know, going after people just for being people, but anybody who's doing it wrong, he'll call it out and be like, this is damaging to the landscape. And if we want better comics, we've got to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And he's even called me out a couple of times in his comments with takes that I've had. And I was like, okay, you know, he's right about this. He's right about that. Like, there's an artistic integrity to that, you know, much like some of the other authors that I've mentioned before, I want to emulate that because it will ultimately result in me making better art myself. And, you know, as much as I want to be read and I want to sell books, like ultimately I want my art to matter to people. And I can't do that if I'm unwilling to be corrected when I'm doing something wrong. There's this great quote that I say a lot from Ray Bradbury. He says, if you hide your ignorance, no one will hit you and you'll never learn. And he had such a way with words, with putting things together like that. And I think about that a lot. And I say, okay, you can't be afraid to be hit for being wrong. And that's been one of my kind of guiding ideas as I navigate the art landscape and see the creators that are doing it right and then see the ones that I would want to emulate and learn from. So those are just a couple of the examples. I'm sure I left some off. Like obviously Louis L'Amour, I've talked about him a lot in different shows and on my channel and stuff. I got a video I'm going to do about him this week. He's had a huge influence on me. Those are several of the guys that I look to say like, okay, if I did things just a little bit more like them in this way or that way, I would get that much better on my artistic journey, as it were.
Now, it's easy for me to forget when we're coming in here to talk about books and writing that you also do the illustration side of things. With that, let's hear about your catalog, you know, the collection of titles you have out there, you know, maybe who the target audiences are for some of that stuff. Anything like that?
So the first series that I published and finished and illustrated start to finish was called Engines of Liberty, and the idea was it was pretty simple. It was the British won the American Revolution because they had magic and wizards. Say something Harry Potter style. Say that they didn't have the statute of secrecy that the Harry Potter wizards have, and they were sending out red coat wizards with wands and stuff to smite these Yankee farmers down and win the revolution, kill George Washington and all of that stuff. Well, the survivors go underground, and over the next 200 years through various iterations in industry and stuff, they develop gunpowder, black powder weapons, diesel engines and stuff, and they build this giant mechanized arsenal. And now they need to, in the alternate 1980s, they need to recruit an army to go fight against the Brits and have a rematch. And the main character is a kid who gets caught up in that. I illustrated those, and so I've always been, I've always drawn one way or another. I started as a kid just drawing, and my mama always made me promise when she saw me drawing. She goes, "You need to grow up and do something with that. Don't ever stop drawing." I was like, "All right, cool." And so I stuck with it. And when I started that series, my plan was to just keep it short and simple, write it kind of pulpy, make it exciting and fast paced. And there would be plenty of stuff in there that I wanted to draw, combat wizards on brooms, fighting guys on flying motorcycle machines and things like that. Like there was a lot of, there was a very strong visual element to that story. But I sat down and I started illustrating in earnest, and I'd never undertaken a project like that. I was like, okay, I've got this slate of drawings here. There's about a dozen of them. It should take me about a month. No, it took me like 3 times that long because I had to come to grips with the fact that like my skill set was not where it needed to be to make it look like I wanted it to in my head. And so finally I was like, okay, I need to nail down a method for drawing these characters in this perspective and what the machines look like and all of that so that it's at least somewhat consistent. And I just have to understand that I'm going to get better as I go. This is a small, independent project. It's probably only going to be read by a couple dozen people. I'll do the best that I can. I hired a guy to do the covers for those books. saved up some money from my day job to pay for really good cover art. And then the interior art was mine. And you can definitely see the progression from the first book to the third. I learned a lot along the way and got way better at it. It took me, just as long to illustrate those books, maybe longer as it did to write them and edit them and everything.
I bet.
I've still got all the original artwork, but especially like those who get through that first book will see a leap into the second, and then we'll say they'll be rewarded for reading the third, because I finally got the really good art that I was looking for that one. And so the series, it's near and dear to my heart. I'm very aware of what its flaws are. I think the story is still strong, and obviously now 10 years later I would do it differently because of the experience that I have. But I still like it for what it is. And then that was mostly aimed at, we'll say that was my plan for that one to be a YA series. So it is what it is there. After that one was done, I wrote a short story, say it's a novella. It was like 25,000 words, called Kill the Beast. And it was kind of a parody of Beauty and the Beast, where Gaston was the good guy. Obviously changing all of the characters and making it different enough and basing it more on the original tale by Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau instead of like the Disney version, because, nobody wants to get sued by the mouse. And I did half a dozen illustrations for that one, and I put them together and I posted them, and I got a lot of feedback saying like, hey, you really leveled up on this one. I was like, okay, I feel like I'm learning more. And that one was in 2017. And I'm probably the most proud of that book out of all of my early works. I did the cover art on that one with a vector art program. And then I just did all the interior illustrations and scanned them in. I had that one made into an audiobook on Audible, and I got a native Frenchman to narrate it. And his narration, like I listened to the book once and I was like, you made it sound better than I wrote it by just narrating it and performing it the way that you did. Like he crushed it. But that one is also an illustrated book in print, and the audiobook is narrated by a native Frenchman who just does a fantastic job with it. So whichever medium people want to read it in, they're in for a treat. I wrote one more YA book called The Hero Next Door, illustrated that one. Same thing. My illustrations leveled up in some ways. There are still other weaknesses that I have in different areas, and I've been buying more books and doing more practice and sketchbooks and stuff to kind of hone in on those things that I know I'm bad at and try to get better at them. I'm trying to think of the last. So then last year, the last like real full illustrated project that I did was a standalone sequel to that Engines of Liberty trilogy, and it was very art heavy. And there are maybe like one or two pieces here and there that I did poorly, but not poorly, that didn't come out the way that I wanted them to in my head. But I looked at them and be like, I still really like this, and it's definitely head and shoulders above the first book from 2014. But the main difference on that one was that I'd finally gotten a computer with a touchscreen and stuff, and I'd been practicing digital art for a couple of years, which it comes out sharper and crisper and cleaner, and it loads a lot cleaner into Amazon's print-on-demand program. So like when the physical book comes out, it looks a lot more like I wanted it to in my head when I put it together. So I do the illustrations for my own books, except for the one that is coming out this week, because it's with the publisher and they have an in-house illustrator. And so she took over on that one. Obviously, she'd read the book and she had some direction to take on it. I haven't seen all of the interior art that she's done, but it's interesting to see another person's interpretation of your work and be like, okay, I wouldn't have come up with it in that way, but I like what she did with it. And I'm curious to see the full slate of pieces when it all comes out. But obviously, with how much I've gotten into comics in the last several years, like I've been a very casual comics fan my whole life. I'd pick up the occasional graphic novel or trade paperback. But just 2 years ago, a new Transformers series started up. I'm a huge Transformers fan. And I was like, okay, as long as I don't have to go chasing down back issues and this, that, and the other thing, if I'm just buying whatever comes out month to month, I'll go start a pull file for the first time, and I'll do that. And that got me into buying a whole bunch of other comics and seeing different other artists and their styles. Reading comics, much like reading a print book, will improve your ability to render things visually in the same way that a print novel would improve your usage of the word. And so I'm getting better at that. And I'm even getting that itch at the back of my head that says, hey, you could do a comic book. You could do a graphic novel. Yeah, I could do it with all this free time that I have, for sure. But
yeah, you've been busy.
I approach that, the same way that I approach everything else, just knowing that I'll never be good enough, but the goal isn't to get good enough. The goal is to continually get better. Because every artist that I've ever followed over the years, like I've seen that same progress with their work. They just get better by doing it. And my writing has definitely improved. My illustrations have improved, and at the same time, doing this book with Raconteur Press, there are times when I don't want to do every single thing. I can give enough description for the reader to have their own mental picture of it. And, whatever the publisher decides they want to illustrate to make the book a little bit more exciting or to punch it up, fine with me. At this point, I've done enough of my own work on my own books to show things that I want the readers to see in the same way that I did. Like, I don't mind that. Now I'm at the point where I want more people reading my work, and a publisher will have a much greater reach in that particular aspect of the craft than I obviously have for the last 10 years. So I'm not so hung up on like, this has to look exactly the way that I want it. It's more like, I'll take charge of 100% of the words. If they've got an in-house artist that wants to illustrate this particular book, let them ride. Let's see what they come up with.
Yeah, very cool. I'm surprised they haven't sent you any copies to thumb through. Jeez.
They're coming through this week, so that's got more to do with Raconteur's method. If I can talk about them a little bit here. So
you can.
The founder there, his name is Ian McMurtry. For a long time, he ran a blog called the Law Dog Files. He's a former LEO. And I guess through some affiliation that he had with, I might be botching some of the names here. I believe it was with Tony Weisskopf, who's over at Baen Books. She said, hey, you write this really well, you write that really well. Why don't you do an anthology of some kind? And he didn't think that if he put out a call for an anthology of short stories in whatever the original one was, that he would get enough to fill a full anthology. And, Tony's been in the publishing business for, 40, 50 years. Like she knows what she's talking about on that side of things. She goes, no, go ahead and do it. You'll see what happens. And lo and behold, he ended up having enough submissions that were of high enough quality to do 2 anthologies. And that got the ball rolling for him to, and again, I hope I'm getting the details of this right, to establish this method of let's come up with ideas for anthologies. We'll get a call going. The authors will submit. We'll be able to publish this way using Amazon's platform. We've got this other service called PubShare where a portion of the royalties will go to every author. He's a big stickler for having ethical contracts. He really hates unethical contracts. I think he's seen his fair share of them in his day, and so one of his guiding principles is like whoever writes for us, they're in charge of their work. The rights revert after a year. Everybody who does the work gets paid. We're not screwing anybody over. I'm like, okay, obviously those are ethics that are going to be appealing on the business side of things. And then on the creative side of things, they've got a couple of guiding principles, and very few restrictions in place when it comes to content. Like they don't want the most extreme content out there, but they want imagination and adventure and excitement. Reading needs to be exciting. They don't want drudgery or anything. And they put out these anthology calls, multiple times a year over several years until finally last year they had an anthology come out, I believe, every 2 weeks. I think this year, they published something like 25 anthologies. And they built up enough of a reader list and a mailing list that they're like, okay, we can branch out of the anthology game, still do some anthologies, but now we can get into, full genre pieces. And one of the ladies who works there, Cedar Sanderson, she's also the in-house illustrator. She has years and years of experience as a librarian. And she's like, probably the most underserved target audience is young boys. We need more boys' adventure books. Girl readers they're everywhere. Like that section of the demographics is well served, but we need stuff that is specifically going to appeal to boys, and they need to have more adventure books. And that call went live last fall, and that's when I was like, okay, I've had a loose concept of an idea for a middle grade adventure book out in the desert since probably going back to 2018. And if I really sat down and hammered out the missing pieces and put together an outline, I bet I could put together something that they want. And even though there was a muddy middle to it, I still had, like, you get into the actual execution of an outline, and you're like, okay, there were some unforeseen things that I didn't prepare for, and you got to stop and do a couple of rewrites here and there. That's fine. That book still came together better and quicker than most things that I have written in the last 10 years. And after I put together the first draft, and then I did a quick edit for a second draft, I read it to my boys who were 12 and 10. And I did that with a bit of an asterisk, like just a little bit of trepidation. It's like my boys are really good and supportive and stuff, and I'm sure that if I read it to them, they'll like it. And I wrote it with them in mind, like what are the kind of things that are going to excite my boys, because I want kids in their peer group to read it. And they got really into it. And I was like, okay, cool. You know, they support dad, yeehaw. But then like I sent it off, and then for like weeks and even months after reading it to my son, he would randomly come up to me and say like, hey, I really like that part where this happened, or this was my favorite chapter, or are they going to publish your book yet? And he's hyping it up to his friends. And I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe I actually did this one right then. But it was cool to sync up with a publisher that not only has that approach to the business side of it, but that our creative goals align in the same direction. And I've read a couple of their boys' adventure books that they've published already. And I'm like, okay, I like what they're doing. I like their ethos. I like their creative execution. And I really feel like I found a good fit for these kinds of projects going forward. Not everything that I write is probably going to be up their alley. Some of it's going to be, you know, wrong for the genre or wrong for the scope and the length and stuff. They've got a particular, we'll say that the audience that they know they have has particular tastes in terms of like the size and overall complexity of a book they want to read. But as long as I'm writing something with that aim, I'll probably send it to them first, you know, for the next little while, just to see how this experiment unfolds. But I really like that there were blue collar guys like, you know, like Ian and like the others around him that just said, okay, like here's what we want. We're going to build this thing from the ground up. Here are going to be our rules, and here's the people that we want to bring on board. And I looked at I looked at it as an outsider and be like, man, most of what they're doing is stuff that I want to do too. And so I sent them a short story last summer. It got into one of their anthologies, and then I sent them this book back in the spring, and they wanted to publish it pretty much right away. And here we are. So I think that's another example of the whole, like, you say it takes 20 years to become an overnight success. It's like, well, I also had to go through certain experiences on the creative side and on the business side to be the right kind of author for this kind of publisher. And it's just, I'm lucky I found them, because they're a very good fit for what I'm about and what I like to do.
Yeah, very cool. When is Fossil Force releasing?
October 29th. It's 2 days from when you and I are recording right now. It'll be out on Wednesday. There has been a pre-order page up for about 2 weeks for the Kindle edition, but Amazon won't let you set up pre-order pages for the paperback edition, which I'm not 100% sure what the list price is. Like, the Kindle book is $5, and I think print book will be around 15. It lists the page count at 189, but Cedar told me the other day that that's inaccurate, and it'll adjust when the book actually comes out. That the print book that I wrote is more than that, but I don't know by how much. So it's pretty substantial. Some of the other books I would compare it to is I've got a print book of one called Boy's Own Starship that they publish, and I don't know the word count on that one, but it's pretty thin. Dreams of Golden Fire and I Got This are other books that are probably a little bit more comparable in length. I know by word count, Fossil Force is 48,000, around there. So depending on like their trim size and font size and all that, it'll probably be around 250 pages. But one of my one of my kind of governing rules as I was writing it was everything had to be, what's the right word? Like everything has to flow from one thing to the next. Like there always has to be cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect to get you to the next scene or the next development. Like this happened, therefore this happened. You don't want randomly and then, because then you're just writing disjointed things that are all happening in sequence. Like the cause and effect has to be intentional, because that's the kind of stuff that a young mind is going to follow. Like, oh, he did this, therefore this is going to happen, which leads to A, B, C, D, E. I think that was more important than just the visual elements of the story or the humor that I put in. I think it was more of like the subtext of it all that will keep a young mind going along, because they can understand why things are happening. It's not just cool things happening in front of them. There's a purpose to it all that'll keep pulling them along in the story.
Yeah, very cool. This has been a good conversation. I feel like we've kind of gone all over the place in a sense to learn.
I don't know if I have ADD. I might. I'm not going to get tested, but there are times when I get on shows like this and I just start spewing out of my mouth, and I tend to drag the host all over the map. So
no, it's all good.
My apologies to the listener, but thanks for giving me a long leash on this. This is kind of what my brain does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's your program too. You're spending all the time here.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, any things, ideas, thoughts, quips that we haven't heard that you feel must be heard?
Other thoughts. Well, my YouTube channel is called Graham Bradley Truckerman Reads. Like I said, I do book reviews over there. I'll post videos a couple of times a week, and I'm actually on vacation this week, so I'll be out in the shop doing some more high quality videos and not just me talking with a picture over it. I also write at truckermanreads.substack.com. Some of the reviews there will be a little bit different, more detailed than the video stuff. But if there's any other, quips or bits of wisdom or things that I try to tell everybody, it's just that, read more. In the words of Louis L'Amour, it doesn't matter at first what you read, only that you read. Find things that you like and go down that rabbit hole as much as you want, and then don't be afraid to branch out. 15 years ago or so, I was chilling at my brother's house, and my brother he's the academic of the family. He's got a doctorate in political philosophy. He reads all kinds of boring crap. And I was reading, one of Sanderson's Mistborn books, and he was reading a book about the history of salt. And I was like, you've got to be freaking kidding me. Like, that sounds incredibly boring. And
oh man, Salt rules. You haven't read Salt?
Within 10 years, I read that book and I was like, okay, I'm starting to get it. But I at the time, I lacked the intellectual curiosity to read a nonfiction about the history and importance of salt. But through continuing to develop my love of more complex fiction, ultimately that got me into an interest in really riveting nonfiction, which can seem dry to the casual pulp reader, but the more you read, the more you'll want to branch out, and the more you'll really love the stuff that right now you feel is dry. You'll see a purpose for it, and you'll be glad that you did. So it doesn't matter at first what you read, only that you read. Find stuff you like and just keep going. Reading it's the oldest way of passing information for a reason. Oral traditions have been around, sure, but the fixed and written word is timeless. Keep it alive and keep it going to the next generation. Benefit from what's come before as well. I think the more effort that people put into it, the more that they'll appreciate that they did.
An even and balanced perspective. Graham, I appreciate you coming and hanging out, talking, telling us about your work, your perspective on the craft. Man, I was looking while you were telling me, you've got a dozen books out now? So you're crushing it.
Probably. Let me check myself here. I've got the Four Engines books. I've got The Hero Next Door. I've got Sic Semper Tyrannosaurus. That book it's just a short story. It was kind of written as a joke. Somebody came up with that title and was like, I bet I could make a story that fits that title. And I did. Mr. Friday, Sheriff Porter. Sheriff Porter was a fun one. That was the joke on that one was, how Bella from Twilight, how her dad was the small town sheriff. Mm-hmm. I thought it would be a lot cooler if her dad was Sheriff Longmire from the Longmire series. And, what if the story was really about him and he found out his daughter was dating a vampire and he got to hunt his daughter's boyfriend. And that's what Sheriff Porter is. The guy's a global war on terror veteran, and he gets to go to war with his daughter's boyfriend in a small town in Oregon, and just had a hoot writing it. That's what I like to do. Stories should go as fast as they can and as slow as they need to when I'm writing them, and just be a little bit wacky, but take it seriously, and just have fun, especially in fiction. Above all, have fun. Do it well, do it right, but have fun.
Very cool. Well, hey, Graham, enjoy the rest of your day.
Many thanks, sir. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you again, and we will talk again before too long.